Good morning, Mr. Berg, and also to your guest, Mr. Bruner. This is a very important issue to be decided by the courts, and in my personal opinion, if the Second Amendment doesn't mean what it says in plain English, then the rest of the amendments don't really mean anything. All they are is rhetoric. But one thing I would like to have Mr. Bruner discuss, if he will, and that is the use of the word in their well-organized militia, and that the organizing and the language of the amendment was made as words were used and meant at the time it was written. And at right now, in other words, the organized is what we would say effective or useful, and this now is being used by the liberal press and so forth to confuse the issue, in my belief. Now, there are a number of restrictions on firearm characteristics that can be kept by people, and that is a rifle barrel of greater than 50 caliber is prohibited. We are prohibited from owning full automatic weapons and a number of other things which I can't go into. But the facts that these prohibitions are already there are used. In other words, a lot of people don't know about them, and this is used as a confusion factor to say, well, you can't have a cannon. What about a cannon, a howitzer, this or that or the other? I mean,
or an atom bomb, for whatever. Homer, let's give Lee Bruner a chance to answer your or comment on your call.
All right, go ahead.
Thank you very much.
You bet.
Homer, thank you very much. The first point you bring up is the term well-regulated militia, and the argument that you're making is textualism and original intent is what we call it in constitutional law, and it's exactly on point. Those words mean what they meant when they were written. And at the time they were written, typically when we think of a well-regulated militia right now, we think of the National Guard. That's the argument that's usually used. There was no National Guard when these were written. The Patrick Henry organized a militia and went out when they stole. The British came in and took 1,000 pounds of gunpowder out of Philadelphia, I believe it was. And Patrick Henry then organized a militia and went out and stopped the British from doing that. It was prior to the Revolutionary War. So the argument that they use, of course, is a well-regulated militia means the National Guard or something like that. But the counter-argument to that is exactly the argument that you're making, that it means what it meant when it was written, and it didn't mean National Guard when it was written.
I wonder if it would apply to militia groups. We've had a couple of them here in Montana, and there's still some in Michigan and Oregon and so on. There's still some around. I wonder if it applies to them as a militia. They are well organized, and they are a militia. They're civilians.
Sure. The question there falls under a well-regulated militia, and that would be that's a subjective test to the court whether or not that particular group is a well-regulated militia. I think a lot of the interest in those groups was generated for exactly that reason, that people thought, well, if we'll form a militia, and therefore we meet the requirements of the Constitution, and we'll just see how that works out.
Lee Bruner visiting with us this morning, talking about the Second Amendment and answering your questions, taking your comments on the Second Amendment. We'll take a short break. We'll be right back. You're listening to the Voices of Montana on the Northern News Network.
The Voices of Montana will continue right after this. The fastest hour in Montana radio continues. Call David right now at 1-866-627-5483.
And we're back at 20 minutes until the top of the hour. Lee Bruner, attorney and candidate for Attorney General, is visiting with us. We're talking about something that I know from my own experience here at the microphone is something that is near and dear. I hate to use that expression. It's a little trite, but still, you hold that Second Amendment, as you do with the other amendments of the Constitution and the Constitution itself, very, very close to your heart. Lee, I got a note here during the break, and it's just a little afield of what we're talking about concealed weapons. which is kind of a sidebar to the initial issue, but nevertheless I want to answer it. The writer's Dave in Columbia Falls, and he says, I'm planning to get the required training to apply for a carry permit, and I've been told at every turn to expect the county sheriff's office to try to talk me out of it when I go to apply. He wants to know why law enforcement does not like to see people carrying concealed weapons. Well, the answer should be evident. It should be pretty obvious. As a former police officer, I did not like to see everybody having a gun. I knew they had the right to do it. I wasn't particularly comfortable with approaching a car late at night with 5 guys in it in a country road someplace and being surprised by a gun. But nevertheless, I know that they have the right to do that. And I imagine that's probably the feeling of most law enforcement officers. Now, before we went on the air this morning, I was talking with Lee Bruner about a situation in a college. You probably saw it on the news where a college had a drill, and the drill was that a terrorist was going to take over a classroom full of students and professors. And that's what he did. Scared the bejeebers out of everybody. Held a gun to the professor's head. He said later he thought he was going to die. The students, they didn't know what was going on either. The students were told to sit against a wall, close their eyes, not look at what was going on, while the terrorist made his demands. The problem with it was a drill, but only the administration knew about it. And had there been a student or a professor there with a gun, well, Lee, you know, and I'm sure everybody else knows, what would have happened.
Right. From an attorney standpoint, the first 3 words that come to my mind are incredibly poor judgment. If there had been someone with a gun there, that would have been a horrible tragedy. And not necessarily just a gun. What if someone had a pocket knife and and had decided to take matters into their own hands? After 9/11 and the folks on the different airplanes, and that one that went down in the field there were several martial arts guys on the plane. The famous "Let's roll" quote.
Flight 93, I think.
Right, Flight 93. Those doing something like that in an uncontrolled environment where you don't know how that professor or those kids are going to react is just incredibly poor judgment. And unfortunately, as an attorney, incredibly poor judgment helps me make my house payment sometimes.
But that's going to be used, had it gone awry, that's going to be used as one of the arguments about the Second Amendment.
Sure. Well, and it's an argument that doesn't gain traction. Just because somebody's going to act incredibly stupid doesn't deprive me of my constitutional rights.
We don't have the right to be stupid, I guess.
Well, you have the right to be stupid, but you're also subject to the consequences of those actions.